G'day everyone! So look, I was swimming in the ocean on Isla Margarita in the Caribbean when my dad, Greg Bryan, passed away. It was sort of a beautiful thing, really, because my dad loved the ocean. Now I am in Cuba, and I'm surrounded by water, and my mind is being absolutely flooded with warm memories of my dear old pops, Gregory Bryan, a man who loved adventure. My dad was a crusader, I think. I've been casting my mind back to when I was a child, and thinking of all the fun little dad moments that I shared with Mr. Greg Bryan, lying in bed with my parents and thinking my dad was dead because he was breathing so slowly. Climbing all over my dad. He had a bald head even back then, and it was great for sort of getting a grip to sort of climb him. My dad has always loved his favourite Scottish restaurant, and he would take Tim and me separately on father and son nights, and we would always go to McDonald's to the drive-through to share a meal together and just sort of chit chat. We used to go to Beach Mission, and Dad allowed me, or I was given a cruppet, which is like a muppet, which is like a puppet. And I used to help my dad in church in the service. And I used to accidentally leave the mouth open and he would always close it for me. But even all the way back then, my dad was sort of trying to involve me in his life. I remember incineration night where Dad would just burn everything, and Tim and I thought it was magical, and all of our neighbours hated us for that. Fireworks. I was terrified of fireworks, and I still don't really like them. That's why Nicaragua is so great for me, with a distant sound of gunfire. You know, I feel sort of, it helps me psychologically. But my dad would always do this, so I'd be like, and I'd change it to how he was doing the so that I would feel safer. I once took all of the tithe money that my parents had saved to give to missionaries in other countries, and I spent it on ice creams for all of the kids in our neighborhood. And Dad came and he found me, and we had to take all the ice creams back so that we could recover the money, but he didn't smack me for it. He understood that I was just trying to be generous to the people in our community. Family holidays in Newcastle, especially Christmas. Dad adored his two sisters and their families, and we'd sometimes stay at the Rules as well, and always at the beach, you know, having fun with my cousins. My dad was a big believer in family. We moved to Canberra. We went on an outreach with the Redigers to Southeast Asia. And that's when all of our eyes were really, really open to how we could share the love of God in other countries. The goldfish tanks. Dad always had goldfish tanks. I don't know when they started, but certainly from when I was a child all the way up until my dad passed away, there was always a goldfish tank full of goldfish in our house. Dad loves poultry, and I kind of took that on too. I really love ducks, and I extended it though to like dogs and horses as well. So I remember one time in Canberra, in Downer, we had this tiny little house with a tiny little yard, and I had my horse and a couple of dogs and 6 ducks and 10 chickens, that sort of thing, and it was just mayhem. Dad would come to the hockey games that I would play in, and Mum would sort of get out and cheer, but Dad hated the cold, and so he would sit in the car and he would sort of pretend that he was watching, but he was really reading the newspaper, and I would get in and he'd ask, so did you win? And I'd be like, yep, even though we hadn't won, we'd actually lost or whatever. I could tell him anything and he'd believe me. And skiing, we used to go as a family, and by family I mean Mum sort of had this little program at Guthaga in the snowy mountains, and you could a family could ski for the price of 2 adults and 2 children. So she'd bring all the kids from YWAM. There'd be 20 kids on the bus and we'd all ski for like $2 each. It was great. And eventually my dad would never ski because he hated the cold, but some random person sort of said, why don't you give it a try after like 10 years of no. And he did, and he loved it. Our family loves the snow. Dad used to create these productions from the YWAM base, the International Christian School, and that's sort of why I've done what I've done, because my dad would take this little show that he put together around to all of the schools and the nursing homes and the hospitals and what have you, and we would sing and dance and talk about God. It was great. And then he even came with us kids on a King's Kids outreach, which was led by the Redigers, up to Brisbane to the World Expo in 1988. Dad really loved being a part of our lives. Dad continued his love of homeschooling as a teacher and would put kids in family groups to help each other in the classroom. And so that's what I did when I was a teacher in Mexico and in Nicaragua. And I remember a lady, actually my supervisor, sort of saying, wow, the ownership these kids have is just really out there, because they wouldn't come and ask me questions, they'd ask each other questions and sort it out themselves. It was really my dad who inspired me to do that. As a teenager, Dad and Mum taking us off to Spirit Alive to pray for whole communities for 40 hours. We always did everything as a family, and it was just such a wonderful time being together and sharing together. Dad always loved random people, and I love random people too. That's why I'm probably your friend. I met a lady who came to the hospital, and she sort of said, yeah, my son was in a coma for 3 months, and your dad came every single day to pray for him and anoint him with oil. So really love that about my dad, that he wasn't sort of putting it all out there, that he would really do his best to love each person he interacted with in his own way. As an adult, my dad has been a super granddad to my kids. When he came to Nicaragua the first time, Cesny, my son, had an addiction to Coca-Cola, which he got from his grandfather, and my dad would say, yeah, we're just going for a walk now, and Cesny's told me that they would actually go and buy Coca-Cola and drink it together. And Lorenzi has shared the same sort of thing, that when we were on outreach in the US and Dad was with us, that he would take them for a walk, quote unquote, except for they actually went to McDonald's, and they did it nearly every single day. So they had quite a little scam going on there that I never sort of caught on to. My most treasured memory with Dad was when we were in Colorado together, and we were stuck there because of the socio-political crisis in Nicaragua, and so we had to spend Christmas somewhere. So we spent it in a cabin, 3 months in a cabin in Colorado, and Dad would go off to every single meeting that the church had on. He was just so into it. He so loves people. He just sort of couldn't miss one thing that was happening at the church. And quite a treasured moment for me was when I was having a heart-to-heart with a pastor there, and Dad just sort of sat there with a smile on his face, and it was very important for me. In that moment, I felt very loved, and I don't know if validated is the right word to use, but I really felt quite a special connection with my dad form in that very last time that we sort of spent a chunk of time together when he was well. My dad was always someone who listened to me. It was a judgment-free zone, and he wasn't like the devil's advocate, but he always sort of understood the opposing view but didn't sort of slam it on ya. So I'm really sorry that I can't be with you today as you remember my beautiful dad. I know that some of you have travelled really far. My uncle and auntie and uncles and aunties and cousins. I spent so much time with my dad over the last couple of years, and Mum and I agreed that I should just continue my journey throughout Latin America. In one of my last days, Dad told me words that I needed to hear, and I don't really feel very sad. Dad had been in so much pain at times. So if anything, I feel a sense of relief for my dad, who is now not in pain. And I really kind of feel like a piece of me is lying in that coffin with my dad very close to his heart. And will be buried with him. And another piece of me has somehow managed to slip through onto the other side with my dad, and is soaring above the clouds up in heaven. So I love you all. Take care of each other and hug someone every day. Special thanks to my mum, to Z, to Francesca, to Lorenziella, Cesny, to Raphael, to Billy, to Tim, to Bindi, to Caius, Talia and Kale. I love you all. I'll see you soon. Bye.